Let's get it. Everybody good? Okay. Time will start now. Eli and I negate. Contention 1 is assuring our allies. Branch 15 of the FPRI writes, U.S. force presence and security commitments have massively reduced the perceived need for America's allies to seek nuclear weapons. He continues, from Germany and Italy to South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, these aspects of U.S. policy prove central to limiting the spread of nuclear arms. However, following public statements made against those security guarantees, Mackenzie 20 of Defense 1 writes, as the Trump administration scrambles traditional foreign policy practice, experts warn that some of America's longest allies are increasingly considering the pursuit of nuclear weapons. Luckily, as of right now, Mackenzie concludes the risk of allies rapidly nuclearizing is low. However, instantly abandoning 7 critical allies would likely push nervous partners across the globe over the edge. Indeed, Brown 17 of Air Force University writes, although a nuclear proliferation strategy is currently a fringe idea for most U.S. allies, a significant retrenchment in U.S. security commitments could make these ideas viable, particularly for states facing highly acute threats. Indeed, Brown Headhammer 20 of the Washington Post finds the United States, European, and Asian allies already question whether they can rely on the U.S. nuclear umbrella. However, even if just one state proliferates, the results are a calamity. Thayer 95 of the University of Chicago explains, nuclear proliferation increases the possibility that nuclear weapons be used accidentally, without authorization, or by third parties. Thus, Cronin 15 of the Journal of Strategic Studies concludes nuclear proliferation contributes to a real risk of nuclear war, even in a situation of mad among rational states. Contention 2 is protecting a friend. Pollock 20 of the Washington Institute explains, if U.S. troops stay in Iraq, they would counter Iran's malign influence throughout the region. But if they leave, Iraq would be at immediate risk of slipping back into destructive isolation with even less ability to resist Iran's predatory policies. Indeed, Nahad 20 of Brookings writes, a U.S. troop withdrawal would expose a weak Iraq to its powerful Iranian neighbor, concluding that Iraq would be handed over on a silver platter. There are 4 impacts to an Iranian takeover of Iraq. First is Kurdish genocide. Currently, 6 million Kurds live in Iraq. Unfortunately, Daly 20 of Brookings writes, once the U.S. umbrella is gone, the Kurds would be more at the mercy of the Shia militias, Iran, and the central government. With nothing standing in its way, Iran would likely crush the Kurds. As Franceman 17 of the Jerusalem Post finds, today Iran views Kurdish aspirations and power as a threat to Iranian supremacy in Baghdad, as Kurds are mostly Sunni. Indeed, Kakarash 19 of the Jerusalem Post warns authoritarian states may invoke state sovereignty and national security to carry out ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Kurds. Second is financing. Pollock 20 writes, Iraq is now one of the world's top oil exporters with huge reserves. If the United States leaves, Iran would effectively gain control, increasing control of vast energy and financial resources, diverting them from Iraqi development in order to evade sanctions and greatly assist its own hegemonic ambitions. This would be devastating. As McKay 20 of Fox News finds, the religious regime would spend any money financing offshore work, ranging from Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Syrian government to militias in Iraq and Yemen. The third impact is sanctions. Jihad 20 of the War on the Rocks furthers. If the United States does leave and disengages from Iraq, it will leave Iran with a more influential position in Iraqi politics. It will strengthen the Bina bloc, which campaigned on forcing U.S. troops out in the 2018 elections, and it will be a foreign policy achievement for the Iranian government. The hawks in the Trump administration who urged the president to escalate against Iran would decide that Iraq will be treated as an enemy, thereby necessitating sanctions. For Iraq, that would be the epitome of loss of sovereignty and create a dangerous instability, pushing it towards a cycle of violence. Sanctions in Iraq have been horrific in the past. As Core 801 of the Nation finds, studies on sanctions in Iraq estimated the number of excess deaths among children to be 227,000. With the coronavirus presently ravaging Iraq, the number of casualties is sure to be far higher. The situation in Iran proves this. As Osman 20 of Middle East Eye finds, Iranians cannot buy or make necessary medical supplies under U.S. sanctions. Researchers predict that if sanctions are not lifted, at least 3.5 million Iranian lives will be lost to COVID-19. The same could happen in Iraq. Fourth, establishing the Crescent. Conable 20 of the Miami Herald writes that if American troops have to be withdrawn, the United States would have to consider Iraq effectively lost to Iran. The so-called Shiite Crescent stretching from Iran through Iraq to the Levant would be brought closer to reality. If Iran could maintain its foothold in Iraq, it would have won the Crescent. The establishment of the Shiite Crescent will be devastating for regional stability. Wary 17 of Oxford University writes, this geographic bloc of like-minded polities would challenge the status quo of pro-Western Sunni dominance in the Middle East. It could have a cascading effect in the region. Shia-Sunni tensions could re-emerge, which would destabilize Persian Gulf states that have sizable Shia minority populations, such as Saudi Arabia, concluding this would propel the possibility of a Shiite-Sunni conflict even more. That would be devastating. As Cater of the INN writes, the 8-year war between the Sunni and the Shia resulted in well over 1 million deaths in the 80s. Thus, save lives and negate.
Can you send the impact evidence from the last impact?
Mm-hmm. It's sent.
Okay, we'll let you know when you get it. And then is it chill if I read that if I look at that while he reads case?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I just got it. Oh, not like the one card, like all the cards you read in the impact.
Oh, you want the entire? Okay, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to take in any prep for that. I got it. Okay. Give me like 2 seconds. All right, it's sent.
Already.
Okay, before Seth reads case as well, a quick content warning. One of our contentions discusses issues of sex trafficking and sexual assault. Is that okay with everyone? And if it's not, we can have a discussion about how to discuss that properly in the round. Everyone's okay with that? Okay. And I just got the email, so we should be good to go.
Okay, everyone's good? Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. We affirm contention 1 is sex trafficking. Keith Allred of the National Institute for Civil Discourse writes in 2005 that sheer numbers make the deployed U.S. military personnel one of the largest sources of demand for sexual services around the world, which is provided mostly by trafficked women. Indeed, Emily Chang of Notre Dame Law writes in 2001 that the United States consistently allows and encourages the development of an active sex industry for military rest and recreation and in areas surrounding U.S. military bases. The same holds true in the Gulf. Deborah McNutt explains in 2007 that U.S. military deployments in the Gulf War and the Iraq War have reinvigorated prostitution and the trafficking of women in the Middle East. McNutt continues that it is difficult to track the widespread trafficking of workers since prostitution rings keep their tracks well hidden, and it is not in the interest of the military to reveal information that may damage their war effort. As a result, she concludes that it is our responsibility as Americans to stop our military's abuses of women by ending the occupation. Withdrawal is the only way to solve. Chang finalizes that there is little to no documentation of shutdowns of brothels near military installations abroad for reasons other than military withdrawal. Contention 2 is keep calm and leave the Gulf. Subpoint A is an Iranian conflict. The New York Times' Julian Barnes writes in April that tensions with Iran have deepened as a deadly tit-for-tat has unfolded inside Iraq. In March, an Iranian-backed militia group launched strikes against the United States forces, killing 2 soldiers in hopes of inciting troop withdrawal. The bottom line is clear. The Washington Post editorial board writes in March that either Iran will succeed in pushing the United States forces out of Iraq, or it will draw the United States into a larger military conflict. These strikes will continue indefinitely. The board furthers that Iran hopes to distract from domestic unrest and views American troops as easy targets, since rocket strikes are not easily countered. After interviewing Iraqi and American military officials, the New York Times' Mark Mazzetti furthers in March, the militia groups inside Iraq seem to be trying to provoke the United States into a bloodier conflict, and Iran may not be able to prevent militia attacks in the face of potential escalation. If Iran continues its onslaught of American soldiers, an American response is imminent. Mazzetti writes that the Pentagon has ordered a campaign to destroy an Iranian-backed militia group that has threatened more attacks against American troops. Removing the U.S. military and thus prevents escalation. Simply, if U.S. troops aren't in Iraq, they can't be killed and the U.S. won't retaliate. The situation is urgent. Mazzetti furthers that top officials forecast an imminent large strike against U.S. troops and believe that an Iranian response would be hamstrung by the coronavirus, creating the optimal conditions for retaliation. Conflicts with Shiite militias escalates to war. Barnes explains that U.S. officials are uncertain of Tehran's involvement and are considering a direct strike on the Iranian state. Mazzetti thus concludes that these tit-for-tat exchanges could draw the United States into a wider war with Iran. Alex Ward of Vox contextualizes. A U.S.-Iran war would likely lead to hundreds of thousands dead. Trying to forcibly remove the country's leadership might drive that total into the millions. The B point is the war in Yemen. Since 2014, the Saudi-led coalition has fought the Iran-backed Houthi rebels, devastating one of the world's poorest countries. Amnesty International finds in March that the war has killed 233,000 and pushed 16 million to the brink of starvation. The American security guarantee is to blame. The Carnegie Endowment's Harry Kamek explains in 2017 that U.S. presence eliminated repercussions for Saudi's aggressive actions, encouraging the coalition to intervene in Yemen. NYU's Mohammed Wazi confirms in 2018 that the security guarantee disincentivizes negotiations as Saudi Arabia believes it can win the conflict with U.S. backing. But conversely, Saudi Arabia is more likely to accept a peace process if the United States won't provide military assistance. This is empirically confirmed. After Iranian proxies' 2019 attacks against Saudi oil, the Quincy Institute's Trita Prissa writes as of March, recognizing the U.S. military was no longer at their disposal, Saudi Arabia stepped up talks in Yemen. Violence on both sides declined as a result, with an 80% reduction in Saudi-led airstrikes, and there were no Yemeni deaths in the previous 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the peace was short-lived. Prissa warns that a show of military force disincentivizes U.S. allies from taking diplomacy seriously. They interpret it as a license to resume destabilization in Yemen. The New York Times' Rick Gladstone confirms just 2 days ago that Saudi Arabia broke the week-old ceasefire, launching 25 airstrikes. Affirm. Are you good for cross?
Yeah. Can I take the first question?
Yeah.
So let's talk about your Iran scenario. Why did they kill American troops in Iraq?
It wasn't Iran, it was a proxy group.
Why do proxy groups funded by Iran kill American troops in Iraq?
The evidence we read says that there are some domestic issues in Iran, so they think that it's a way to get a little bit more political support.
Iraq specifically, or just
Uh,
killing America?
That's why no. This is Iran. The
Yeah.
reason that they're conducting attacks on American soldiers is because they view them as easy targets because rocket strikes are hard to counter, and so they think
Okay.
it gets them a little bit of political.
They like targeting American soldiers. You can take a question.
Let's talk about your second impact and contention too. Oh, actually, let's talk about your first impact about the Kurdish genocide. Which evidence do you read says specifically that Iran would commit a genocide against the Kurds?
So our third evidence is very specific in that states use national security guarantees, which is exactly what our Franzman evidence indicates Iran is doing in order to genocide the Kurds. And our Franzman evidence indicates that they want to repress them.
But no. Your Franzman evidence says that they don't like the Kurds, and your next piece of evidence says that historically states have done this. Do you read? Do you read a piece of that said? Let me finish my question. Do you read a piece of evidence that says that Iran would commit ethnic cleansing or genocide against the Kurds?
So the first piece of evidence, the Franzman evidence, does not say they don't. Wait, can I finish? I let you. It doesn't say they don't like the Kurds. It says they see the Kurds having aspirations and power as a threat to their hold on Iraq, which is why they brutally repress them. And
I think it's a little bit of a bold claim to stretch that into they will commit a genocide against the Kurds.
I mean, even if it's just like mass repression, that's still a bad thing. Like you don't.
Okay,
I mean,
wait.
Wait, hold on. We would say that the evidence is pretty specific in that when authoritarian states like Iraq do specifically like this kind of justification through national security, it's typically through genocide. And in the 1970s and 80s, they literally
mentioned Iran
to the point of death. What?
Your evidence doesn't mention Iran. It just says states. I don't think it's fair to make the claim to extrapolate from your evidence that this would happen in Iran.
That's why we read the Franzman evidence too. But all right. So on your C2 about like Yemen specifically.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, when was the like 80% reduction in airstrikes?
So the PRISA evidence says that the 80% reduction in airstrikes was after the United States pulled out.
When? What month?
Like, I don't know.
November. When did we pull out?
Like, why does this? Like, our evidence says specifically that it was because we pulled out.
I know what your evidence says. It's like the most popular card on the topic. When did we pull out? Which we didn't actually do.
Well, it wasn't that we pulled out. It was that we didn't redeploy more. I don't know when it's from. I'm assuming we did.
That's fine. We'll handle it in rebuttal. All right. We'll take some prep.
Call me. Starting now. Okay, that was 207. It's just down their case. Is everybody ready? I'll take that as a yes. Just gonna open my timer. Start on there, C1 about sex trafficking. First, turn the link. Pulling out of the Middle East frees up troops to be moved to Southeast Asia. The U.S. military focus is already pivoting there to counter China. Barnes of the New York Times in April 2020 reports U.S. military officials have outlined a spending request to bolster deterrence against China. The funds would be spent on new radar warning systems and cruise missiles and would also pay for more exercises with allies, deployments of additional forces, and new intelligence sharing centers. The efforts would help improve the U.S. military's ability to deter the People's Liberation Army. Then, redirecting U.S. troops to Southeast Asia is problematic. That's where the majority of global sex trafficking occurs. NST 19 reports the Asia Pacific is in fact the biggest problem when it comes to human trafficking. It is estimated that 25 million people are trapped in modern slavery in the region, accounting for 62% of the global total. We say that in their world, you always see sex trafficking get worse because the troops are just redirected to Southeast Asia where they fuel it more. Their own evidence talks about Southeast Asia more than the Gulf. Their McNutt evidence literally is talking primarily about South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. Then, sanctions turn this. If the U.S. crushes Iraq with sanctions as a result of RC2, the economic disaster in Iraq will increase sex trafficking. Charles of Reuters in '09 reports growing poverty around the world has sparked an increase in both supply and demand for human trafficking. And in times of economic crisis, victims are more vulnerable. Affected communities are more vulnerable as persons under economic stress are more likely to fall prey to traffickers who often get their victims through promises of better life or promises of better earnings. Especially in times of economic stress, for our sanctions impact, there will be much more of this. People will be drawn in and will have a much harder time getting out afterwards. Then it's non-unique. They say brothels are shut down, but their evidence never says the sex trafficking ends. We just say that the brothels near the base is closed to cover their tracks and they reopen elsewhere because their own evidence says it's like a lucrative business. Okay. Then on their C2, first you can turn it. War is likelier in the affirmative world because there are fewer troops at risk. Indeed, in an election year, Trump does not want to alienate the public. Payne of the Washington Post in 20 reports, since voters bear the human cost of war, presidents have good political reason to think twice before putting troops in harm's way. Any bombing campaign against Iran would try to ensure that as few U.S. troops as possible get killed. We say that Trump pulls all the troops out and then starts this really aggressive war because he won't lose the election, because troops won't get killed. Then a bunch of defense. He concedes in cross that their incentive is killing American troops. They can still kill those who remain and anyone in neighboring Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, and any of the other non-Gulf bases with U.S. borders with Iran. Then a laundry list of reasons why it won't happen. 1, if Iran starts aggressing, China will back out of the region, which is a crucial blow for Iran because they are the ones who are currently investing and giving them support. BRI projects are happening too. China will pull out because it doesn't want it to be in a proxy war with the U.S. because their economy is on downturn and coronavirus has thrashed their country. Then GCC cooperation means tensions will flare if Iran starts aggressing. Saudi Arabia will unite all the Arab states and isolate Iran, which Iran doesn't want. Then, in the event of aggression, the U.S. wouldn't be scared to destroy Iran, especially because they have already killed the top general with zero repercussions, and Iran doesn't want to be steamrolled. Then on Yemen. First, you can turn their whole argument because the diplomacy they talked about only happened because the U.S. increased troops. The peace talks they discussed were proposed in September 2019. Saudi Arabia didn't start negotiating until November. In October, the U.S. tripled the number of troops in Saudi Arabia. They added 2,000 more troops to Saudi Arabia. The reason why this led to diplomacy comes from Brands of the SSI in 2015, who quantifies the more U.S. troops are stationed in a country, the more that closely that country's foreign policy orientation aligns with that of the U.S. The U.S. pushed them towards diplomacy. Then you can turn it again. Pulling out increases GCC aggression. Pollock 15 of Brookings writes, in the absence of American military involvement, the GCC states get frightened, and their tendency when frightened is to lash out. The unprecedented GCC air campaign in Yemen is a striking example of this. As the Gulf Arab states see it, the United States has never been so disengaged from the region. This is also an alternate warrant for why the U.S. doubling its military presence in Saudi Arabia led to peace talks. Prefer this evidence to their argument about how presence emboldens allies, as our presence is the lowest it's been in 35 years, but allies are engaged in more conflicts than ever before. Then, on their Yemen impact, turn it in 2 ways. Pulling out worsens Yemen in 2 ways. Rogan of the Washington Examiner in 18 reports, if the U.S. pulls its functional support for the Saudi alliance, 2 negative consequences will immediately follow. First, the Saudis will lose all inhibitions about accurate targeting that American intervention has forced. Negate.
What was the turn? That was overtime.
Okay. It's just that the U.S. makes sure the Saudis do accurate targeting in Yemen.
Accurate targeting? Okay.
Yeah, if you want the card, I can send it.
That's fine. We'll start running prep.
Okay. We will start running prep time now.
You know how
Okay. Yeah. That was 1:30
No.
used.
that was 2 minutes. You started your time.
2 minutes used. Sorry. Okay. It's gonna be my C1, my C3, and then or my C1, my C2 link to, and then their case. Is everybody ready? Okay. On sex trafficking, group their first two turns about like moving troops to Southeast Asia. 4 responses. One is that this doesn't mean that new brothels are created because they explain that the brothels there are already created, which means that there is no net increase in sex trafficking. Second, we don't think Trump is going to redeploy to China because of the coronavirus. Third, the rings get busted in other areas, but specifically there's a lack of attention to this sorts of thing in Iran. And fourth is that just because there's more sex trafficking in the Asia Pacific does not mean that the sex trafficking is worse. Then they say that an economic disaster increases the supply. One, they don't account for the demand side, which is that if you decrease the amount of American troops there is literally zero demand, which is why the Chang evidence says we have only ever seen brothels closed when we pull out troops. And B is that if there's economic disaster, people won't be spending money on sex trafficking, so the demand also goes down there. Then they say that sex trafficking continues and the brothels shut down. One, they read no evidence on this, but two, our argument is that the profitability of sex trafficking goes down when you don't have U.S. troops to spend on that. We think that sex trafficking comes before all other arguments because McNutt 02 explains that there's a lack of attention paid to sex trafficking, whereas there are other intervening actors like the IAEA and the U.S. and Iran and Israel that could potentially solve for their actors. And second, because it is an infinite impact, they are advocating for indefinite keeping of troops in the region, which means that you see perpetuation of this crime. Then go to our second subpoint about Saudi Arabia. The first, so as a general overview to this, MBS is currently facing a succession crisis. That's Horace, and he explains that they want his uncle into power, as the elites want his uncle into power as opposed to him. The problem here is that the only person backing his play is the United States, and as a result, he himself, MBS himself, the leader of Saudi Arabia, has said he's willing to posture and bow down to the United States in the event that they pull out. This means that all of their other turns don't matter because MBS himself has said that he wants to listen to the United States. Then they say that, so first they say that they sent in more troops and that's when the negotiations happen. Call their evidence. It is literally their own analysis. Their evidence, there's no causality relationship, whereas our Parsi evidence specifically identifies the reason for these negotiations as the troop withdrawal. Then they say the GCC lashes out. The GCC is dead in the water. That's Al Jazeera who explains that because of the Saudi blockade on Qatar, or the GCC is not functioning. Then they like blithely say that you make targeting worse when the United States pulls out. There is no warrant, and if Saudi Arabia loses the incentive to get involved, then they lose this argument. Go to their first contention about proliferation. So they don't specify any actors, which means that you should let us read new cards in summary if they blow up one impact scenario. But we think that the security guarantee still exists. 3 warrants. A is that they still have the United States nuclear umbrella. B is that the United States has mutual defense treaties, and C is that they have trade ties with the United States. But Franson explains that MBS doesn't want nukes because of the threat of sanctions, the legacy of the Iraqi invasion, and their own impact scenario disproves because if there is war, then that would actually destroy them. And you can turn it because Mearsheimer explains that Iran is nuclearizing in response to the United States, which means that the chance of a nuclear conflict only goes up in their world, and Saudi Arabia would nuclearize in that case because A, it is an existential conflict, and B, it gives them a legitimacy crisis. But also Ravid explains the United States would preemptively attack Iran, triggering their impact on a US-Iran war. Go to contention 2 about Iraq. Iran is not going to expand. 4 warrants. A, Reid explains that they're facing internal domestic issues. B, Rubenstein explains that they care mostly about regime survival, so they are not going to attack other actors. C, Vakil explains that they're simply sick of conflict, which is why they're trying to negotiate right now. And D, Parsi explains that they are 8 times behind the GCC because they have outdated weaponry and other things, so they do not want to go to war. Their first impact is about a Kurdish genocide. They read you no evidence that explicitly says that Iran would actually commit a genocide on the Kurds. That is a bold assumption to make. They just say that Iran hates the Kurds and Turkey committed a genocide, but that does not mean Iran commits a genocide. But also, the United States isn't going to do anything to help the Kurds. Or like we literally supported Abadi, who's the prime minister who supported invading Kurdish land to punish them for declaring independence. The United States does not care about the Kurds. Having troops in the region doesn't do anything. On oil, Iran is already a big oil producer. This is non-unique. On sanctions, their evidence is talking about the sanctions regime as a whole, but they don't isolate for like the specific impact of a new round of sanctions. Then you can impact turn it because Iranian expansion is good. They are offering $3 billion in credit to Iraq to try to help them develop infrastructure, and Shiite militias are also good because Love of JSU explains that they're providing social services to increase political legitimacy. Stanford explains that Hezbollah is operating schools, clinics, and delivering drinking water, and their schools are giving to 14,000 students. Thank you. Please vote aye.
All right, can we see whatever evidence on the last turn was before like 412? Like the before the Shia militia is good, the part that was like in time, the like first thing.
Oh, Iran is giving infrastructure spending?
That was also over time, like the very first thing.
What do you mean?
You read like before Lovejoy. Was there any card before Lovejoy?
Yeah, that was
Was
Iran.
Lovejoy? What?
That was not a Iran is giving credit. Iran is giving credit to develop infrastructure.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Send me that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay.
I'll look at it during cross if that's cool.
Yep, that's
Oh,
chill.
can I also see like the
Yeah,
MBS thing?
Can we see MBS says he'll bow down to the US?
Yep.
Like where it
Um,
quotes him.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Actually, I think it's a top official.
Yeah,
but
the top official says that MBS says he's
Yeah.
willing to roll some.
Does the top official have a name?
Just send the evidence.
The card might say that it's
Just-
an.
Okay, it's fine. It's fine.
We'll
we'll show you the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can read it during cross if that's cool.
yeah.
Yep, that's chill.
If you go to previous motion.
Which email do we have?
Is it sent?
We sent. Did you send the card?
Yeah, send the first. Oh wait, no, I haven't sent the first card. I can send the first.
Oh,
card.
we're sending the first card, then we'll send the Horace one.
All right, I'll just look at them when they're all sent during cross.
The first one should be sent.
Okay, let me know when all of them are.
Sorry, I have it up. My computer's just being slow. Give me 2 seconds.
You're good, man.
You're good.
We almost good, just because it's taken 3 minutes to send out this one piece of evidence.
It's been sent.
Awesome. Y'all can start cross.
Yep, you good for cross?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's start on
Two-
the. Oh, sorry.
timer. Sorry. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, let's start on the response you make to our Pollock turn about the GCC getting emboldened.
Yeah.
You say that the GCC is dead because Al Jazeera says that Qatar is being excluded.
Yes.
Correct? Who?
No, because the Saudi blockade on Qatar.
Yeah. And that's Al Jazeera reporting that, correct?
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
site.
Who funds Al Jazeera?
I'm not sure, man. I'm
The
sorry.
royal family of Qatar. You could take a question.
Sure. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about. Okay, wait. How does that beat back the response? Like,
Because it's Qatari propaganda saying that the GCC is dead because Qatar isn't being actively included. Can I take a question?
okay, yeah, you can take a question.
Okay, in case you read that the US military presence increases demand for sex trafficking, correct?
U.S. military presence increases demand for sex trafficking. Yes.
Okay, why then does it not increase demand when the US military presence is increased in Asia, which is what most of your evidence is talking about in the
The
first place?
difference is that you give me a bunch of alt causes for sex trafficking in Asia, i.e., there is local demand for it, which is why the rates of it are much higher. So we say that wait, 2 seconds. Let me just finish the thing. That we say that means that there isn't the creation of new brothels because there are pre-existing infrastructure. But when the United States pulls out of the Gulf, that results in a decrease in brothels. So then there is still a net decrease.
I mean, we would contest that, but no, we would say your own evidence says the number of brothels increases when military bases are created and when more troops are moved.
Our evidence, it does not do the reverse causality. Our evidence says that when we withdraw troops,
doesn't
the
need
number of
to.
brothels goes down.
You say that the US forces are the greatest demand for sex trafficking, correct?
Yes,
In the world.
because there's
Why then, if the US does not increase military presence in a region where sex trafficking is much more is much less frowned upon, will it not increase sex trafficking there?
it's about the number of troops that there are.
Yeah, we say all of them get moved to Asia.
Why would okay, so first of all, we contest that, but second of all, the industry in Asia is super developed. So the brothels and stuff already exist and they have an industry that they can give to them.
If they have increased demand, do they have to increase supply?
We would contest that because the infrastructure is already set up and there's already so much domestic supply. Like
Yeah.
wait. The warrant here is about the number of people. That's the demand, right? Your evidence that you read in rebuttal says that the rates of sex trafficking and the rates of demand for sex trafficking are super high in Asia, which is why they're already there. The brothels are already established. And also, no one in this round has read any evidence that indicates reverse causality. This is simply your analysis. Can I take a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of the Shiite crescent. Do you think
Oh, that's 3 minutes. We'll take prep. We have a minute 57 left.
Wait, no, you took 2 minutes before rebuttal.
Wait,
We have
it's
57.
4.
You have
No,
50.
it's 3.
It's 3? Oh,
Yeah, it's only
Yeah.
3 minutes.
okay.
We had judges and prelims that were like, we'll do 3:30. We're not sure.
Well, then your judges were bad in prelims.
Yeah, that's facts. All right. Well, all right. As soon as he calls me, we'll start the 57.
Starting now.
That was 46. All right. Is everyone good? The order is going to be Asia pivot, and then the Iran turn, they read. Their case, my case. Is everyone good? Wait, let me close Facebook out. Sorry about that. I just don't want it to ding. It's not even open. Never mind. All right. Time will start now. We indicate that right now the United States is looking to move as many troops as possible to the East Asia region. They say for 4 reasons this won't happen. The first reason is coronavirus. The resolution happens after the coronavirus. We literally can't move troops around until then. There's an executive order that blocks the movement of troops until coronavirus ends. So that means when the resolution happens, they still move. Then they say that there's more attention to the problem there than in Iran. That's not true. Our evidence literally indicates that it's worse there and there's less attention. Then they say that there's no reverse causality. They're making nut evidence. It's in the email chain. Literally says military deployments reinvigorate prostitution and create these problems. That is direct causality. At that point, they've conceded 100% of the link that all of these troops, because the United States is looking to move as many as possible, go to East Asia, which turns their entire link. It means the entire argument is at least non-unique, but they've also conceded that it's literally worse in East Asia or they've literally considered that it's actually worse in East Asia for like all, because there's better infrastructure there and there's less accountability and so forth. Their argument on how they're like already brothels makes absolutely no sense. It's scalar, more demand, more supply. This is basic. That turns their entire link into the most important impact. And also their evidence literally indicates more troops, more brothels. Their evidence works for us. Go to the turn they read on Iran proliferating. The Mearsheimer evidence doesn't matter. Iran has been like 1 year away from a nuke for the last 20 years. They have never actually developed it. We can show you evidence from 2 years ago that says they were 8 months away, and from 1 year ago that says they were 8 months away, and so forth. They have never developed the nuke because they know that doing so would get them destroyed by the United States, like they themselves say. The impact disproves the link. At that point, go to their second contention. The turns are really easy. Their evidence at the top of our turns about how like whatever MBS is facing a secession crisis, it's from 2018. Every single actor they talk about is already in jail. Even the brother of the king is in jail, and MBS controls every single security apparatus in the country. He is not worried about the succession crisis. He has jailed every rival he has. This is never going to happen. Then go to Parsi. We say that the reason why there was diplomacy was because we literally tripled the presence. The Brand's turn indicates that tripling the presence causes more leverage. The reason you prefer this to their Parsi evidence is because the cause is more proximate to the effect. We say this happened in October, and their effect happened in November, but what they talk about happened in September. Between what Parsi says caused the thing in November is our argument from October. This means at very minimum, they have no link, but it's really just a turn for us. Don't buy their analysis. Parsi's timeline is terrible. Then on the Pollock turn, they say the GCC literally doesn't function. Really big problem though. Even if the GCC doesn't function, this blockade in Qatar existed in 2017. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have been bombing Yemen since way after that. Obviously, the two of them can still band together and be aggressive. Now, they are on the idea that economic devastation leads to sex trafficking. They say that like this doesn't account for demand. The evidence is so specific that economic devastation increases both supply and demand. This takes out all of their front lines. That war causes economic devastation. So all of our turns on war link into this framework. They also concede 100% of the link on that if we pull out, Trump will be more likely to do a war in Iran because he won't be killing his own troops. That's 3 links into war. Go to our case. They really mishandled the link on sanctions. We do not need to win any increase in presence in Iraq to win sanctions. The evidence is so explicit. The U.S. pulling out is a political win for the pro-Iranian Bina party that leads Trump to believe that they are a puppet, puppet, and sanction them like he does Hezbollah. The only response is that it's not specific. Our Osman evidence is specific to the current situation and coronavirus, and this kills 3.5 million. The timeline on corona in Iraq is different from in East Asia, so even if the resolution happens after corona, we can still have coronavirus in Iraq, which means you can still see 3.5 million die. It's conceded, and it links into sex trafficking. That's 5 links into sex trafficking and a turn.
We're gonna run some prep time starting now.
I think y'all are out of prep.
We'll start on our sex trafficking argument. Then it will go to your case, and then it will go to Yemen. Okay, is everybody ready? Okay, so the easiest place to vote for us is on our contention one about sex trafficking. The first thing they go for is this turn saying that saying that we would redeploy troops to the Asia Pacific, which means that you would see an increase in sex trafficking there, which is worse. So they don't read evidence that says that the regulations are worse in these other nations. They just say that the industry is more developed there. So it doesn't mean that moving our troops there means that sex trafficking gets worse. So this isn't a place to vote for them. But second of all, we would say that the industry in these nations is already so developed that it's not like they're going to start up new brothels. They say the demand there is already so high, so there's no incentive for them to create new brothels. They say our McNutt evidence says this, but our McNutt evidence says that when you go into nations where there is no industry, that's when they start to set up brothels because demand increases. But there's already such high demand in the Asia Pacific that there's no reason why we would set up new brothels, especially when they don't warrant why we would move every single troop into the Asia Pacific, because we already have tons of troops there. We're not trying to anger China that much. They say that we want to do it, but they don't warrant ever why we would want to do it. The second argument they go for is that econ links in because there's an increase in supply. The tag that they read said that there was an increase in demand to accompany that, but their card does not say that. The reason is when there's high economic devastation, people aren't going to spend on sexual services, so obviously demand for that goes down, and they don't ever warrant why demand would increase. The demand probably goes down because our logic makes a whole lot more sense, which means even if the supply goes up, people it doesn't matter because these industries are no longer profitable, so they still shut down, which is why our Cheng evidence says that we've still seen like when we pull out, we've still seen these industries shut down. But then they say that like conflict links in, but our McNutt evidence is specific in saying that the only reason this happens is when the soldiers want to have downtime when they're not in conflict, which means conflict doesn't link in, which means that they don't link into this argument. And they concede it's the most important because A, there's a lack of attention on it, and B, it happens forever and ever if we keep our troops there. At the end of the day, we say that there's a very low probability that we move our troops to another location or we move all our troops to another location, which means on net you still see a reduction in this, which means that we still win what they concede. Yeah,
all the conflict.
Yeah, which means that we still win what they concede is the most important impact. Okay, let's go to their second contention, which is what they go for. They concede a big turn at the bottom of the argument, which is that increasing Iraqi influence or increasing Iranian influence in Iraq is good because Iran is developing infrastructure. They've specifically invested $3 billion, and they've conceded an increase in influence of these Shiite groups. It's good because it increases education. And this probably turns their link that they try to link into our sex trafficking argument because it means that the economy gets better when Iran has more influence. So there's no way that they link into sex trafficking because the economy gets better. So it takes out their link as well. All right, let's go answer the Yemen turns. None of their evidence does the analysis they do. Our Parsi evidence is specific that when we put in troops, that's when we saw negotiations happen. And then when we pulled out, that's when we saw the ceasefire broken. At the end of the day, don't buy their analysis because they don't read any cards that say that this is why it happened. It's not a place to vote for them.
All right. Can we start, Grant?
Yeah, sure. Good when you are.
Do the 3 D-links at the top of my C1 that you read about why Iran will not expand, that I explicitly conceded, take out your turns? The 3 at the top about how Iran will never go into Iraq.
Right. You should have bit them in the last speech.
No, I explicitly said concede the turns at the top. They don't respond to our sanctions link.
But you didn't cross-apply that to the turns.
And no. Also, these are why they wouldn't expand militarily.
Oh yeah, this is
your argument is that Iran gets more influence
wait, 2
within
seconds.
Iraq.
The way you went for your sanctions link is you said that Iran goes and expands its influence in Iraq. Our argument, yes, they're expanding their influence, but by doing it means like economic development. Like Iran is not this bad actor that the United States portrays them to be. Hezbollah, everyone hates. They're going and they're building infrastructure. They're building clean water. They're building schools. They're educating people.
Time more. The way I extend the sanctions argument is how the sanctions argument is.
Time more.
Wait.
Not time.
Sorry. Okay. Time more. The sanctions argument is that pulling out strengthens the Bina bloc, which is a political party in the Iraqi parliament. We do not or that is not at all reliant on anything happening in Iran. It is literally just that it's a political victory for them, which you concede out of constructive.
Yes.
That's why when I extended it, I conceded all the defense that Iran does nothing.
Our
Wow, take
defense-
Our defense is that Iran won't
So
expand
our defense
militarily.
is reasons why Iran will not like march into Iraq.
Yes. Your evidence indicates. Wait. Your evidence at the top indicates that they're not willing to spend on anywhere else because they're trying to resolve domestic problems.
no.
Domestic issues. No. The Reed evidence is specifically saying that because there's civil unrest domestically, they won't send their troops abroad.
But you also read evidence that they're turning inwards, and also your evidence about them
No.
opening an RF line is
The turning inwards evidence is talking about the military.
Yeah.
Every dealing we read at the top is talking about a decrease in military expansionism.
They're not going to spend an extra $3.5 billion, which is why your evidence.
No. This is an empiric.
and
It
they're
says that
dealing
they
with
currently are
domestic
spending
unrest.
$3.5 billion.
And if they gain more influence in
Well, then
Iraq,
they'll
they
spend
expand
more.
their influence. Yeah. Okay, can we ask a question because we spent 2
Yeah, that's fine. You can make the question.
Okay, so can we all agree that sex trafficking is the most important impact in this round?
Yes, but can we also agree
You're
that our
going.
evidence?
I understand you're going to go for Lincoln's on the conflict and the econ stuff and the turn and whatever, but can everyone agree that the impact that matters most is reducing sex trafficking?
That's fine, sure.
Okay,
But
cool.
now let's talk about our evidence, though. The evidence indicates, and word for word, growing poverty around the world has sparked an increase in both supply and demand for human trafficking. That's
Okay, but
word
you
for
guys
word.
can warrant that.
You
We
guys-
give you warrants as to why it decreased.
The warrant is in the
Yeah,
rebuttal,
the
and it's
warrant was read in rebuttal and it's in the card, which you said was bad without calling for. The warrant says that instability makes the populations vulnerable to being tricked into thinking they will have a better life.
That's
Supply
supply
side.
side.
You
What's the
guys
warrant?
And wait,
Like
It
demand.
says demand increases too. You say the evidence doesn't talk about demand without calling for it.
Hold on.
You can't paraphrase our evidence into saying what you want it to say.
all right. We'll take our
We have
last
13 seconds.
13. Oh, okay, cool.
Call Roy. Starting now. Okay. It'll be their case, our case. Let me just get my timer. Okay, is everybody ready? Start on RC1, they're cleanly losing this for a couple reasons. First, they extend no terminal impact, so you shouldn't know how to vote on this. But then, their McNutt evidence says that wherever the US is, they're the biggest demand for sex trafficking. At that point, at the point where they clean concede that the US does want to pivot to Asia because it wants to increasingly challenge China in the region, you see more troops go to Asia, where we say sex trafficking is already happening on such a large scale, it'll just increase more. And that's really bad because they say the problem is ignored, and like we co-opt their wing because their world increases sex trafficking more in a region where there's comparatively less oversight because more exists. Then go down to their C2. They have conceded the turn that says that war is more likely in an affirmative world in every single speech. It says Trump does not want to put US troops in harm's way, so he will bomb Iran as soon as you affirm, and the troops are out of the way, so he doesn't think he's losing his re-election chances. At that point, you can vote really clearly on the analysis Roy does in summary, which tells you that war devastates economies, which will also increase the sex trade in the area, because of the evidence they pretend they called for, but they never did, that says growing poverty has sparked an increase in both supply and demand for human trafficking. I encourage you to call for the evidence. It's really good. In a time of economic crisis, victims are more vulnerable and affected communities are more vulnerable. Then they just say we have no cards for our turn on Parsi. Yes, we do. It's Brands who says that the more troops are in a country, the more their policy mirrors ours. That's why Saudi Arabia started negotiating in November after we tripled the number of troops there. Just because their card doesn't do a good comparative doesn't mean ours doesn't. Then on our case, even if infrastructure is good, we say it will never get built because of sanctions. Sanctions still devastate the Iraqi economy, and the clean impact that they have never once contested, that is the most contextualized and you should feel the most comfortable voting on, is that sanctions will block medicine to Iraq, which kills 3.5 million people because of coronavirus. The argument is very simple. It says that if the US pulls out the Bina party, which is the Iran sympathizer party in Iraq, gets massive political clout because they look like they beat the US out. Then Trump sees them as a political threat and as an Iranian puppet, and so imposes sanctions which kill 3.5 million people. Vote there. It's the most contextualized.
Okay, it's going to start on the weighing on sex trafficking, then really quickly on their case, Saudi, Iran, and then my sex trafficking argument. Is everyone good?
Do sex trafficking.
No, it's going to be fun. Don't worry. Is everyone good? They concede in Crossfire that sex trafficking is the most important impact, so whoever reduces that the most wins the round. So on their case, they link into sex trafficking through economic damage. But they also consider this term that says that you build infrastructure. They give no quantification, no comparison between the sanctions and the infrastructure, especially because the infrastructure is being built from Iran. So there's a chance that it falls back. You don't know how much economic damage that causes. On the Saudi and Iranian stuff, that is just saying that conflict causes economic damage. So if I prove to you that economic damage does not increase sex trafficking, they don't have a link here. Why is that true? They conceded all the reasons why this is the case. One is that when you don't have money, you can't spend on sex trafficking, which means that there can't be an increase in demand. Two is that they give you no warrant. They just say that people become more vulnerable. But yes, they become more vulnerable, which is why there is an increase in supply, because people get tricked into sex trafficking. But that does not mean that people are able to better afford sex trafficking. And they concede the all-red evidence that says that the United States is the greatest source of demand. So even if there's even if there's a poor economy, that doesn't mean that more people will get more people will have demand for sex trafficking. So let's go to our argument. The one response that they extend is this idea that we are moving troops to China. They have missed all of our response to this. One is that they never proved to you that we are sending all of these troops to China, which means that on net there is still some reduction in sex trafficking that is often to be garnered for us. Two is that the comparative here is they don't read you any evidence that says that the industry is worse in Asia. They just say that there are more sex trafficking brothels, which we also think is a reason why the impact of putting troops in the Asia Pacific is much less, because the industry there is already developed. There's a large difference because there is so much of an industry there already, whereas when you pull out from the Gulf, you absolutely destroy these industries irrevocably. And if demand goes down, these industries can entirely collapse. That's the Chang evidence, which means that there is so much of a decrease in the Gulf as compared to a marginal increase in the Asia Pacific that the amount of sex trafficking on net goes down. When we pull out troops, they are no longer spending their time abusing women. And as a result, we see a decrease in sex trafficking, which they agree is the most important thing in the round. None of the other things matter. Conflict doesn't link in. The economy doesn't link in. The only way is by decreasing troops. Thank you.
Good round, y'all.
You're on, boys.
Go ahead, y'all.
Anybody need any evidence?
I do.
Awesome.
Some of it may have been sent. I haven't looked at the chain, but brands, has that been sent?
Yep, I can get that for you.
Okay, Osman.
Yep, I can grab that.
Okay, Reed. Just send Parsi. I've heard it enough, but I want to see it one more time. McNutt.
All right, y'all can come back. I'm sorry. I was the one holding up this entire round. Cool. I assume I'm good to start without the video of the other Bethesda debater. Okay. All right. First, congrats to both teams. I know this isn't the TOC that anyone really wanted, but it's the TOC we got. And it's still like a big deal to make it to elimination rounds. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Horace Mann. I sat, so I can start first. So I ended up voting for Bethesda for a couple of different reasons. One, well, okay, before I get into the RFD, one, I think that this email chain is a mess, and the fact that I have to like dig through things and try to like parse things together is a result of kind of like poor warranting and poor debating by both teams. So there are two things that I attempt to weigh in this debate. The first is the sex trafficking argument. I think that in this round, first of all, if you're going to offer a like trigger warning, you should probably say something to the judges before you just send out all the evidence on it and stuff like that. So make sure you're doing that in the future. Also, if anyone in the room like objected, make sure you're paying to chat and like give some time for any of that to happen. Otherwise, I think on sex trafficking, it's like up to the AF to really prove to me that something is happening on this argument in order to create offense on it. The quote that I have from the final focus is like the Chang evidence explains that there's enough of a decrease in the process of sex trafficking that the total amount decreases. Nowhere in Chang. Right? I think McNutt gets you the closest, in which it says we have like an obligation to do something just because we're the one that started it again in the Middle East, but that's not the argument you go for. So I can't do that for you. On sex trafficking as a whole, one, I think that your argument that only the supply goes up, but not the demand, so therefore it's like better, that's horrific, right? It's the entire process of sex trafficking, the kidnapping, like sending to other countries, like the breaking off of your family, like the horrific torture that a lot of these victims endure, not just like the final act that is like the problem of sex trafficking. And I think it's really, really bad that that's like what you're going to stake the AF's offense on. I don't even think that you're proving that to me in the round. I also don't think that the negatives argument as to like, well, it's like the pivot, the turn exists, all these other things is also true. So I just kind of call this argument to wash, right? The reason I don't end up voting for the affirmative in this round is because the final focus kind of stakes everything on whether or not they can prove that this argument is offense for them, right? At the moment that I just don't think that you're getting anything here, I'm kind of forced into a position that I don't want to be. So that's on the diplomacy / like Yemen discussion. I think the Parsi evidence is just so much better than Brandt's on this, right? Even before, like, I have to go and look at these cards, I think Brandt's is just kind of like this one-liner, like, hey, there's this neat correlation that we found in like the 90s, right? Whereas the Parsi evidence is like a better explanation, there's better warranting, and I just think it's so much better, yet the final focus doesn't extend it, right? So essentially, like, I have this like argument that I don't really believe, but at least it's clean and it gives me like some form of offense, where I don't believe that you're winning the actual like sex trafficking argument that you go for at the end, because that's not what your authors say, and it's also kind of like an incongruity as to what arguments you go for on it. So I vote neg, even though I don't want to.
Before the remaining RFDs, I just want to apologize if what I said was offensive in any way. The idea was that if we decrease the demand, the supply will also go down, but I don't think that was articulated clearly.
Yeah, you were just saying like supply stays as is, like that ain't that bad, which I think was like the really, really bad part.
Yeah, the argument was supposed to be that if demand goes down, then the brothels lose money, so they close down, which is why if there's a short-term increase in supply, eventually the supply goes down a long way because the brothels close down.
But sorry, I'm really sorry if anyone found that I genuinely did not mean it. I'm really sorry.
Yep, you're good. I'm good if the other judges want to talk.
I can go. Can't see here. One sec. There we go. Nice work. I obviously voted pro. I thought that, you know, a lot of this round ended up being pretty muddled for me, especially going through the evidence. I also just have to say, on a broader note, these evidence chains. I haven't judged PF in a while, but I did compete extensively in PF. I'm not sure if they help or if they make the evidence challenges even more confusing. So I have not had one instance where the evidence email chain helped me make a decision one way or the other, to be quite honest with you at this point. But the reason that I voted pro is because at the end of the day, if the negative is admitting that sex trafficking is the most important impact in the round, I was just kind of left thinking that, okay, well, if there's any possible way for me to vote pro on this issue, and there was some meaningful amount of impact, then I thought that would be the best course of action, especially since the negative is already telling me that that is the most important impact in the round. And while the negatives seem to harp on this idea that a lot of the trafficking would end up in the Asia Pacific region, I never really felt like they did a good enough job responding to what the affirmative rebuttal was to that, with respect to things like the industry is already there and that Trump's not going to move people to Asia in the middle of coronavirus. So ultimately, that was the main voter for me, and that was what got me over to the affirmative side.